Ladies and gentlemen, beste reizigers, I'm sorry I can't be with you here today in the physical location. By the time you view this video, I will be somewhere along my flight path from Schiphol Airport over England, across Northern Ireland and the tip of County Donegal on my way across the Atlantic Ocean. Today I will be addressing the notion of the blow-in and the poetic mapping of place in Irish immigrant poetry. To take one single example, and with our 15-minute time limit in mind, I've chosen the opening poem of the anthology edited by Eva Burke and Borbala Farago, Landing Places, Immigrant Poets in Ireland, published in 2010 by Daedalus Press. The anthology was published shortly after the crash landing of the Celtic Tiger, the economic downturn after more than a decade of unprecedented prosperity in Ireland, and a new sort of reckoning with the effect of such wealth. The real estate bubble has left physical scars on the landscape, but the Celtic Tiger has also brought demographic changes to a country that has been defined in large part by its outward immigration and by the worldwide diaspora of Irish and the Irish diaspora writers. Although the history of Irish immigration and the topic of the different waves of immigration deserves their own presentations, I would like to look at one individual poem by poet Chris Agee, a blow-in from the United States who has lived in Ireland since 1979 and who, quote, holds dual Irish and American citizenship and spends part of each year at his home near Dubrovnik in Croatia, end quote, according to the biography accompanying each poet's contribution to the anthology. As Paul Muldoon, former poetry editor of the New Yorker magazine, was fond of saying, I think at this point the listener will want to hear the poem. Achill Triptych by Chris Agee. Boll's Fuchsia, Heinrich Boll. Let's begin, say, with this blow-in from the Japanese Pacific. Windbreak weeping blood red, globe empurpled lanterns, exotic pagodas of the old Irish hedge, companion to Hart's Tongue and Flag Iris, the Verge's Trench and the Mossy Ditch, famine's rhododendron, the post-war electrification. And let us ask, say, why we would ever need to find the place of a Golgotha, if the reality of textum, its meaning, give it us already. O lovely Ireland, writes Heine with irony, fondly, and in his journal's epilogue, honor and glory are due to the Irish women who bring such lovely children into the world, to the Irish tinkers, and to the fuchsia hedges. The same country, he adds, that gives us lynch, or boycott. Still, it's hard squaring all this downtrodden charm with that cemetery at Letterfrack. Camille Suter on Achill. Camille Suter. For me, this is the true ideal of the pure artist. Independent spirit at the periphery of everything. At the centered heart of her singular art, original, tongue and groove, bed, armchair, a hearth, ciggies. Sleeping quarters, come parlour, good food off the hob, and not talking shop, keen memory for people and times. A hatred of selling. On her sward of grass at the back between white cottage gable and walled studio shed, a barrow of hay, sea stones, teasel, sculptures, flotsam and floats, rusted net weights, a hawser, a boat. Crocheted caps, green fingers, schoolgirl tales, Turner's rum job, famous grouse and Guinness. Stay close to the things that made you. If mainstream, so much the worse. If not, tant mieux at Untopical 80. Islander, John F. Dean. Everything's a path. Nothing's a path. That is the lesson of the ascent up Slivemore. Bog pools and orchids at the top. In the distance, the deal boomerang of Keel Strand. Islets in silhouette floating humpbacked in the offing. Each square meter's full of the small beauties. Speedwell, self-heal, bog cotton, innumerable shamrocky tormentile, to say nothing of Heather's mauve grave, mauve-grey gambling fritillaries. Spongy sundew and spaugham moss blanketing the transhumance past, at whose existential foot is the return to Sean Relig, and a clatter of clachans like a weathered jawbone, unroofed by history's root canal. 2. Writing's like cooking. It has and is the two things, ingredients and technique, mind and body, ship and anchor. The inner leaven, the executory act, the language of life, the life of the language, the world is recipe, your own personal cuisine. But of the two, that first, deed to word, is its indispensable necessity to a matching sufficiency. And here was your first world of first things in the first words of the first place. Darkened, of course, by those dream figures of Paul Henry, now well and truly buried at Letterfrack. Your watchword loyalty against seductions of the centripetal, the other West's apathetic heart. Not your islandman's far-flung, far-out magnetic West, where once as H.B. imagined it, so far from the center of things as if it had slipped way out into the Atlantic, lay the glowing heart of Europe. Young Daedalus, old artificer indeed, and indeed as well. Heinrich Wohl Cottage, Achill Island, County Mayo, June 2009. In the first lines of this first poem in the anthology, Chris Agee associates the immigrant poet with that most Irish of plants, the fuchsia, or Nadaora Day, as it is known in Irish. Even though the plant, found in countless hedgerows across Ireland and uncultivated in the landscape, is a transplant, its association with Ireland is clear in Irish literature. For example, in Benedict Kiley's 1985 novel, Nothing Happens in Carman Cross. An old Republican in the Irish countryside pontificates to his visiting guests. Quote, "Beautiful it is," the old man says, "and Irish it is. And the Irish is still spoken here from the bridge below to the highest house on the mountain. And the fuchsia, Nadaora Day, the tears of God, scarlet for blood, purple for kingliness, do you see the way it grows? The fuchsia and the Irish language, all the way from Dingle to Donegal, go together." End quote. In Chris Agee's Achill Triptych, the toponyms range from the local to the global, from the Japanese specific to a particular beach on Achill Island, where he wrote the poem in Bohl's cottage, now a writer's retreat. Bohl, besides for writing about Achill Island, and of course Irish women, tinkers and fuchsia hedges, also describes a vision of Ireland that is still topical today. Just pick up the inevitable copy of Irische Tagebuch, or Irish Journal, in any youth hostel or bookshop in Ireland. My own father, an Irish immigrant who took the mailboat in the 1960s from Dunleary to Holyhead, and from there to London and to continental Europe, remembers in his self-published memoir, quote, "Years later, when I was living in Germany, I was stunned to find that a German writer, Heinrich Bohl, had distilled into magically simple prose the unforgettable experience of sailing on the mailboat. For most of us, that meant sailing in steerage, the least expensive section. It was difficult to believe that Bohl had not been born and raised in Ireland, that he had not lived through the years of Irish immigration in the 1950s, as I had. His description of travelling through Ireland had made such an impression on the folks in post-war Germany that every time I identified myself there as an Irishman, to anybody who read books, I was immediately told that I just had to read Bohl's Irish Journal." End quote. Of course, it is less Bohl's iconic book and more the accumulation of innumerable depictions of Ireland from writers outside Ireland that Declan Kibbard describes in his 1996 work, Inventing Ireland. In it, he describes Ireland and England as nations that could not have existed one without the other, as well as exile, acting as a nursery for nationhood, or an idea of Ireland, and of course the emergence of a post-colonial Irish writing. In this research seminar, we have read in Peter Burke's History of Cultural History about the many representations, constructions, and inventions in the evolution of cultural analysis, including the invention of invention. In Chapter 5 of What is Cultural History, titled From Representation to Construction, Burke briefly mentions Kibbard's contribution to the field. Quote, "Who invented Ireland?" asked Declan Kibbard at the beginning of his book, Inventing Ireland, 1996. Noting that the Irish exiled abroad made a disproportionate contribution to the idea of the Irish nation, and that the English helped in the work of construction. In the case of the Orient, the role of the West in constructing it as an opposite has become obvious enough. But the problem of the relative importance of different kinds of Westerner, the traveller, the scholar, the missionary, the bureaucrat, and so on, remains open. So does the question of the relative importance of individual and collective invention, and of the ways in which collective creativity works, by creative reception, for instance." End quote. I would like to show now how the immigrants of the new multicultural post-Celtic Tiger Ireland are engaged in a new round of inventing Ireland. Part of the reinventing of Ireland takes place through the naming of place. In the example of Achill Triptych by Agee, the game of geography takes on a form of toggling between microcosm and macrocosm, as in the effect one might get from Googling Earth. In Achill Triptych, already a toponym with dense layers of illusion, Agee names the following places: the Japanese Pacific, Golgotha, "O lovely Ireland," a quote from Bull, that cemetery at Letterfrack, Achill Island, Slieve Moor, Keel Strand, Sean Rilling, Letterfrack and Other West, the Magnetic West, the Atlantic, the glowing heart of Europe, again a quote from Bull. If we ask the same question of this poem as Alex Hewen asks of the poetry of Kieran Carson, namely, what are the potentials of the poem as a type of map, then we begin to see sense of place as provisional and invented by the process of naming. Agee's use of the verb to give in the subjunctive mood, in his rhetorical question, quote, "And let us ask, say, why we would ever need to find the place of Golgotha, if the reality of textum, its meaning, give it us already," end quote. Also questions the authority and indeed the necessity of maps and exact locations. Agee begins with a comment on the common plant fuchsia, as a blow-in from the Japanese Pacific, but continues throughout the poem to list plants native and transplanted to Ireland without differentiation: hart's tongue, flag iris, moss, rhododendron, fuchsia, grass, hay, teasel, orchids, speedwell, self-heal, bog cotton, shamrock, tormentile, heather, sundew, and spaham moss. In the case of Achill Triptych, the geographic zoom of place names reinforces an idea of Ireland that is minutely local, down to the peat mosses and other endemic plants that he names, and at the same time global, with the reference to the blow-in, na deora day, which is not Irish at all and yet quintessentially Irish. The anthology Landing Places, Immigrant Poets in Ireland, contain contributions that are heterogeneous, quote, heterogeneous and mixed, just like the contributors themselves, end quote, and list them in alphabetical order, without thematic or chronological constraints. With Agee, I have chosen the first poem by the first poet in an anthology that could serve as a rich field of exploration into the potential of the poem as map, and the sense of place in the poetry of the Irish blow-in. I hope that my treatment of Achill Triptych has offered a glimpse into these potentialities. Thank you for your attention.